Hello everyone, I'm Alex Dykes, and in today's video we will be talking about the 2015 and 2016 Ford SuperDuty pickup trucks. That encompasses the F250, F350, and the F450. Now, full disclosure, in this video I have not towed more than 7,500 pounds with this particular vehicle. A, because I don't have a trailer that's capable of carrying more than 7,500 pounds, and B, because in the state of California, like many other states in the United States, you do need either a commercial or a non-commercial Class A license in order to conventionally tow more than 10,000 pounds, and I don't have one. From this angle, you can really see that the front end of the SuperDuty is enormous. Taking a closer look up front, you can see we have these enormous headlamp modules here. Now, one disappointment in my mind is that the headlamp modules use essentially the same reflector for high beams and low beams. They just change the filament on that bulb, so we don't get any additional light because the low beams actually turn off when we engage the high beams. We have fog lamps right down here. Now for 2017, this front end will be completely redesigned because the SuperDuty is getting a complete redesign. For the 2017 model year, the SuperDuty will benefit from the aluminum intensive construction that we've recently seen in the Ford F150. That switch to aluminum will likely improve fuel economy, the payload, and the towing capabilities, just like it did for the F150. As with basically everybody's 3/4 ton or 1 ton pickup trucks, the SuperDuty is very, very large. This ranges from 227 inches up to 263 inches. There are 3 different cabs and 2 different bed lengths to choose from, and you can get single rear wheel or dual rear wheel options. Now the F250 is single rear wheel only. The F350, like we're taking a look at here, can be either single rear wheel or dual rear wheel, and the F450 is dual rear wheel only. I promise that under this hood there is actually an engine, although I can't show you a good camera angle of it because my tripod just doesn't go that high. I'm 6 feet tall, I'm standing up, and you can see how high the front end of the F350 is. Now there are 2 different engines under this hood. Things start out with a 6.2 liter gasoline V8 engine producing 385 horsepower and 405 pound-feet of torque. You'll find that engine in the F250 and the F350 starting. Then we have this particular engine, which is the optional V8 diesel engine. It's a 6.7 liter engine producing 440 horsepower and a whopping 860 pound-feet of torque at an incredibly low 1,600 RPM. Now this engine is optional in the 250 and 350 and standard in the 450. In case you're wondering, this is about 100 pound-feet of torque more than you'll find in the Chevy Silverado at the moment, and it's about the same as you'll find in the Ram for 2015. For 2016, Ram has bumped things up even further to 900 pound-feet of torque, but honestly, when we're talking about numbers that are this big, there's not that much difference between 860 pound-feet of torque and 900 pound-feet of torque when you're towing 30,000 pounds. Let's talk towing and payload, because this is where comparisons get a little bit tricky. Now, there once was a time where a half-ton pickup truck held about 1,000 pounds in the bed, and a 1-ton pickup truck could handle about 2,000 pounds in the bed. But those days are long gone because pickup trucks continue getting bigger and more capable with every generation. This F350 is still in theory a 1-ton pickup truck, but you can put 7,050 pounds of total payload in the F350. Now remember that total payload is passengers and cargo, but even still you can put about 2.5 tons of things in this F350, and that's quite insane. Even more insane, of course, is that if you get the F450, you can tow 31,200 pounds. This is where the F350 and the F450 start differentiating themselves a little bit, and that's why I'm including them both in this particular video. Because the Ram 3500 will tow 31,210 pounds for the 2016 model year. The difference is that Ford splits the models, so if you want maximum towing, you have to get the F450, and that will tow that 31,200 pounds. Its payload, however, is a little bit lower. It drops down to 5,300 pounds in order to give you that maximum towing ability. The F350 is the maximum payload version, 7,050 pounds in the bed. Now, in case you're wondering, the F350 can still tow more than you can in basically every version of the Chevy Silverado. That means that if you're looking for the thing that isn't the same across the board, it would actually be the Dodge Ram pickup truck, because the F350 competes quite well with the Silverado 3500, and there really isn't a Silverado 4500 to compete with the F450 in the same way, and that's really where the Dodge Ram 3500 comes in. Dodge decided not to call it a 4500, they're still calling it a 3500, even when it has that max payload and the max towing capability. Now, the important thing to keep in mind here when comparing it to the Ram is that there is a version of the Ram that beats this both in payload and towing at the same time, and on the Ford side, you do have to choose a little bit between the F350 and the F450 when it comes to towing and payload. The other thing we find in the heavy-duty pickup truck segment that we don't find in the half-ton pickup truck segment is the availability of a power takeoff unit from the transmission that makes it easier to add engine-driven accessories to this kind of pickup truck that you can't do on a 1500 or 150. Obviously, no tow vehicle would be complete without sturdy factory tow options, so we of course get a hitch receiver right here, 7-pin and 4-pin wiring harness right there. And if we lower the tailgate, you'll notice that we also have the 5th wheel prep package in our particular model, and we have another 7-pin wiring harness in the bed. The front seats are large and comfortable in the F350. We are in the King Ranch model, which is not the top end trim, but it's pretty darn close to it. We have 2-way adjustable lumbar support, heated and cooled seats as well. Luggage space is something that pickup trucks sometimes have a problem with. That may sound a little silly because we do have that bed back there, but I don't really want to put my luggage in the bed and have it get wet. The rear seats fold in a few different ways, so you can of course fold the back down. You can put a bag right on there like that if you wanted to, or we can fold the back of this seat up in its upright position, and then we can fold the seat bottom cushion up with this lever right here, and then we have access to a lockable storage compartment right under it. Now, if we didn't opt for the lockable storage compartment, we would get a little bit more room down there, and of course we could use this space right here for a bag. Because of the way these seats fold and the fact that the F350 is as heavy as it is, we actually don't have latch anchors in the back, but the seat does fold forward to reveal a relatively standard top tether anchor. On the inside, you can see that we don't have a sunroof in our particular model, although we do have height adjustable seat belts and height adjustable headrests. Since we are in the King Ranch model, we do have the running W right there on this very attractive brown leather. If we move on over to the door panels, you'll notice we have faux wood trim. We have some more of that brown leather, and then basically everything else is a hard touch plastic. Now, if we look sort of down into the abyss there, you can see that we do have an additional storage cubby right there below the armrest. It is quite large. You can see that the doors still have that very distinctive forward shape where it bumps up a little bit there towards the aft of the door. That's to give us a little bit better view of these mirrors. Now, these are power folding mirrors, and they also go in and out, so they move in that direction to help you see around a trailer a little bit better, and then they also fold flat to the body to help you in parallel parking. The dashboard in the F350 is entirely hard plastic, so we have hard plastic upper, hard plastic lower for the airbag cover, and a hard plastic cover for the glove compartment below that. The glove compartment may be surprisingly small to people not used to pickup trucks, but in general, pickup trucks do seem to have quite small glove compartments. That's fairly average. Over here in the center of the dashboard, we do have a center channel speaker in our particular model, and we have a storage cubby right here. And inside this storage cubby is where you'll find the USB input. We have 2 USB inputs right there, one on top of each other. The SD card slot for the nav system and the auxiliary inputs for this system. It does use RCA jacks, and we do have a video input. On the right side of this compartment, we also have a 12-volt power port. As you can see, you can fit quite a number of smartphones right here inside this storage area. Now, my only complaint is that this dashboard is black, and once we coil everything up in there and close the lid, your phone can get quite toasty in the hot sun. Moving down from that, you can see that we have these large round air vents on either side of this infotainment system. This is the latest Ford MyTouch infotainment system, soon to be replaced by Sync 3. Now, we haven't heard whether or not the 2016 will get Sync 3 at any point in its tenure, or whether we'll have to wait till 2017, but my guess is that we have to wait till 2017. Below the screen, we have a single slot optical displayer, and we have controls for that MyFord system. Below that, we have the controls for our dual zone climate control system. On the right, we have a 12-volt power outlet that opens to the side, and then on the left, we have the controls for our 4-wheel drive system. For high, for low, and then we pull out and push in to activate or deactivate the locking rear axle. Continuing down from there, we have the button for our exhaust brake right over here to enable and disable. We have another 12-volt power outlet. We have our integrated trailer brake controller that activates the brake on the trailer brake controller, and this adjusts the gain. We have auxiliary upfitter switches right here. These allow you to connect electrical items to the vehicle without splicing quite as much wiring in the car. You can then turn them on and off using these switches. So you can use them for exterior lights, for any electrical accessory that you can imagine. And then right over here on the right side, we have a 150 watt, 110 volt AC outlet. Continuing back from there, we have this large center console with removable cup holders. So these cup holders have dividers, so you can actually pull them out and then put a larger drink in there, or you can actually pull the whole container out, and then you have access to this large square space right here. Now, once those 2 cup holder dividers are removed, we can pull out the bottom of that, and then you can see that we have an even deeper storage well right there. You can actually pop one of these dividers right down there on the bottom of that to hold 2 drinks in that fashion. On either side of the cup holder console, we have some additional storage bins right there. Then we have a small dip right here where you can put pens or pencils. The center console is large and very softly padded. Behind that, we have 2 cup holders for the rear passengers. And if I open this lid, you can see that we have an absolutely enormous compartment right in here. I do have an awful lot of camera equipment at the moment, not that I store that in here regularly, but there's also a divider right down there at the bottom that can be latched into place for things. Easily able to fit 2 gallons of milk right in here. On the front side of this compartment, we have yet another 12-volt power outlet, and then if we swivel the camera back towards the lid, you'll notice that we have dividers for pens, pencils, we have a tissue holder, etc. Over on the driver's side, we have a 6-dial instrument cluster, tachometer on the left, speedometer on the right, and then right here across the top, we have our turbo boost gauge. We have engine temperature, transmission temperature, and a fuel gauge. And then in the center of that, we have a multifunction trip computer. The multifunction display is controlled via a button array on the steering wheel, and this is not quite the same as you'll find in the F150. It is a little bit older. So right now we have our fuel economy screen right there. We have trip A, trip B. We have some additional gauges. For instance, transmission oil temperature. We have our compass. And then of course we have a blank screen where we can have a little bit less distraction. We also have certain truck apps, so we can see our off-road position, steering angle, etc. We also have the ability to see how many miles we've accumulated on the trailer if we have one connected. We have certain vehicle settings and some additional information like the My Key or system status check. Zooming out from that, we have a 4-spoke steering wheel. Over on the left side, we have the controls to that multifunction display, this 4-way joystick with OK button. Then we have our cruise control buttons as well, on, off, cancel, and then the set speed down here below those buttons. On the right side, we have the buttons for our infotainment system, track forward, backward, volume up, down, voice command, media button, and then a phone hang-up button right there. On the right side of the steering column, we do have a fairly traditional column shifter. We do have a manual mode with these buttons right over here, and then a tow haul mode button at the end of the stock. Obviously, like every other pickup truck out there, the F350 scores 10 out of 10 points when it comes to my exclusive Trunk Comfort Index. The weight of the F350, as well as the stiff suspension designed for that payload in the back, is noticeable when we start taking this out on rough roads like we're on right here. We definitely get an awful lot of action in the rear end because those rear springs are so stiff. Now, if you were to put about 1,500 to 2,000 pounds in the back, it would seriously help the ride, but of course it would also drop your fuel economy. The SuperDuties are of course very popular on farms and ranches because in order to have towing capability and payload capability this high, we also have to have very sturdy axles up front and in the back. Now of course, we're starting to slip back there, so I'm actually going to have to engage the 4x4 system in this vehicle, and we're really not on that steep of a gravel road right here. That's all down to the weight and the tire size and the tire selection on this particular F350. Again, this is quite a heavy vehicle. Of course, thankfully, we do have a very rugged 4-wheel drive system. We have a locking center coupling, of course. We also have the ability to electrically lock the rear differential. That's a very handy feature. In this particular vehicle, the rear differential lock will automatically disengage once you reach a particular speed. Now, this is a little bit different than we see in something like a Silverado 3500. Silverado does use an automatic locking rear differential. Once out on the road, you'll instantly realize that this V8 diesel is much more civilized than the inline-6 Cummins turbo diesel that we see in the Ram 3500. It's a lot quieter out on the road. Even if we engage this exhaust brake on the vehicle, it's much quieter. The exhaust brake in the Cummins turbo diesel sounds more like a big rigs Jake brake than we see in this particular vehicle. Now, obviously, with 440 horsepower and 860 pound-feet of torque, acceleration is actually quite good for a vehicle that is this heavy. We ran from 0 to 60 in 7.6 seconds, which is pretty solid mid-sized sedan territory for a vehicle that weighs basically 3 tons. Now, I 0 to 60 and quarter-mile test vehicles on the same private road every time. It's a friend of mine that owns a private road and allows me to do that. There's a slight dip at around 1/8 of a mile. And the only time I've ever abandoned a quarter-mile run was in this F350. That's because this F350 does have a very, very stiff rear suspension, and that rear suspension got a little bit unsettled in the dip in the pavement right around that 1/8 mile mark. Anything in this category, any of these large trucks with stiff rear suspensions, they may behave like that. When it comes to braking, obviously it's going to take a decent amount of time for this vehicle to stop. However, it is fairly good in this segment. When we take a look at those letter grades up there on the top of your screen, keep in mind that you should only compare letter grades segment to segment. So obviously I'm giving this an A when it comes to braking, but that doesn't mean this brakes like a Chevy Corvette. Obviously the Corvette is going to stop an awful lot faster, but this does do very well for itself as far as heavy-duty pickup trucks go. Good braking scores are important because, of course, this is also expected to stop a very heavy trailer or 7,000 extra pounds when you put them in the bed. Obviously, the added weight in these heavy-duty pickup trucks will affect the handling, and this will never handle like an F150. However, it does handle relatively well for itself. Now, both the ride and the handling are better in something like a Ram 3500 if you get the optional air suspension. So I'm going to have to give the Ram the A in this particular segment. I'm going to have to give this a B. When it comes to cabin noise, I measured only 71 decibels in this cabin, which makes this among the quietest pickup trucks available. It also means it's just about as quiet as the average luxury car entry, which was a little bit surprising. There's really not that much diesel engine noise coming into the cabin, and there's a great deal of sound insulation in our King Ranch model. Fuel economy is a bit of a mixed bag. Obviously, when you're producing this much horsepower and this many pound-feet of torque, fuel economy is going to take a toll. And this averaged about 14.1 miles per gallon over a week of very mixed driving. That's basically average in this particular segment for a diesel engine. Now, it did get a little bit lower the last time I had a GM diesel, about 13.5 miles per gallon or so, and ever so slightly better in the last Ram 3500 I tested. The important thing to keep in mind in this segment is that when you're taking a look at those window stickers, you will not see fuel economy ratings because they're not required when the vehicle is this heavy. Overall, the F350 out on the road is exactly what you'd expect from a big pickup truck. It's big, it feels big, the turning circle is large. It is a little bit tricky to park in urban situations because it's a little bit difficult to tell where that front corner of the vehicle is relative to the cars around you because we are so high off the ground. We do have a backup camera, and that really does help improve the backing up and parallel parking ability of this vehicle. And overall, the blind spots are actually well taken care of by these very large mirrors on the side. When it comes to pricing, I will be talking 2016 numbers. If you're looking at a 2015 on dealer lots, you should get a slight discount off of what I'm talking about. Now, there are so many different ways to configure your SuperDuty, so many different options. I'll really only be talking about the base prices for each model. The F250 starts at $32,385. The 350 starts at $33,280, which actually is not a very big bump over the 250. But if you want the diesel in the 350, that will set you back $41,760. The F450 is diesel only, and that's $53,060 for the 2016 model year. Comparing the SuperDuty to the Ram 3500 and 2500, we see perhaps the biggest difference right back here. That's because the Ram 2500 uses coil springs, not leaf springs, and it does give you a better ride out there on the highway. Now, the interesting thing about the Ram 2500 is that optionally you can get a rear air suspension in basically every model of the Ram 2500. Now, that replaces the coil springs with an airbag setup like we see in dump trucks, cement trucks, big rigs, that sort of thing. The air suspension setup also helps improve the ride whether you're lightly loaded or heavily loaded, because it can actually help return the suspension to its optimum ride height. When your vehicle is heavily loaded and the suspension starts dipping down a little bit, you can start compromising the dynamics of the suspension. Conversely, in a vehicle like this, where the springs are designed to have an incredibly high payload capacity, it means that when it's riding empty, the ride is a decent amount rougher than those airbags would be. So it's a nice compromise between the two. Of course, reliability and durability are one thing, but maintenance costs are a little bit different, and you should expect those airbags to cost a little bit more to maintain than a leaf spring setup like this, because there will be a time where they will have to get replaced. Although not the same system, Ram does something very similar in their 3500 pickup truck. They combine an airbag setup with the leaf springs that we get in the regular 3500. Now, that doesn't give you the same kind of ride advantage that we get in the 2500, but it does mean the ride is a little bit more civilized than this F350. Basically, what Ram was able to do is give you a softer leaf spring. For instance, just picking numbers off the top of my head, these bear no resemblance to reality. You could pick a leaf spring that gave you a payload capacity of, say, 2,000 pounds, and then an airbag that had a capacity of, say, 2,000 pounds, and then the two working together would give you a payload of 4,000 pounds. However, if you don't put more than 2,000 pounds in the bed, the airbags aren't really doing anything for you. They only become active when you put more than that 2,000 pounds in the bed. Now, Chrysler hasn't really said where those payload figures line up for their airbags and their leaf springs, but that's the general idea going on. Of course, we have the same kinds of pros and cons we get in the Ram 2500 with the air suspension. We have the promise of a softer ride with the con of possibly higher long-term maintenance costs. You'll also pay more for that air suspension system. It is optional, it's not standard on the Ram. We don't get any of those fancy suspension setups over there in the Silverado 2500 or Silverado 3500, but we do get an interior that feels a little bit fresher than the SuperDuty we're taking a look at here. I also like the fact that we get a slightly larger LCD instrument cluster over there in the Silverado. It is very nicely done. I think the seats are a hair more comfortable in this generation of the Silverado. We'll see what Ford does for the 2017. Of course, if you want the most civilized ride, that would be the Ram 2500 and Ram 3500 with the air suspension options. Now, the rest of the Ram experience becomes a little bit less civilized because that inline-6 Cummins turbo diesel engine is perhaps deliberately loud. It really sounds like a big clattery diesel, like I personally like. This V8 engine that we get here, it's a diesel engine still, but it's much, much quieter than we find in the Ram. Now, some people may find that attractive, some people may not. This is just about as quiet as we see in the Chevy Silverado as well. Which vehicle is right for you really depends on your realistic use case scenario. If you're actually going to be towing 30,000 pounds, then of course the Ford and the Ram are the only options for you. Now, the most critical thing to know about the Ram 3500 versus the Ford Super Duty is exactly how the 3500 and the F350 and the F450 compare with one another. As I implied earlier, both the F350 and the F450 compete with the Ram 3500, and that's what makes the Ram 3500 actually the odd duck out in this particular segment, because the F350 and the Silverado 3500 compete relatively well with one another, very similar tow ratings, the one with the other, very similar payload ratings, etc., and the Ram 3500 is the odd duck out. A Ram 3500, when properly equipped, and that would be with the regular cab, the diesel, and two-wheel drive, and the dual rear axles, can tow 31,210 pounds. Now that's only 10 pounds more than you can tow in an F450. The key thing to remember here is that the F450 only comes one way, and that's Super Crew, diesel, 4x4, and again the dual rear wheels. Now here's where you have to start reading between the marketing lines, because if you were to equip a Ram 3500 comparably to the F450, and that would be the largest cab and 4x4, then you would be able to tow about 1,000 pounds less than its maximum rating. Now on the flip side, the Ram will be able to tow 30,120 pounds, and it will actually also have a higher payload capacity than the Ford F450. The other thing to keep in mind when comparing the F450 to the Ram 3500 is pricing, because the Ram 3500 can be considerably less expensive than an F450, again, because of the way that Ford chooses to configure that F450. It only comes in that one body style. Now, you obviously can choose an awful lot of options. You can make it significantly more expensive. Now, the reason for that price jump is because Ram will sell you a basically bare bones version of the Ram 3500 with the Cummins turbo diesel, the right transmission, and the right rear axle to enable that maximum towing. And over on the Ford side, you do have to get the larger body style. You do have to get the four-wheel drive as well. Now, to put this kind of towing in perspective, 31,000 pounds is about 9 fully loaded Honda Accord V6 models, or 6 Honda Accord V6 models on a 9,000-pound double-decker car trailer. In all honesty, this level of towing is all about commercial operators or just bragging rights, because you actually need a special license in many states or special endorsements in several states in order to tow this much weight. If you're a commercial operator, you need to know that if you cross state lines in a commercial endeavor, you will actually have to stop at weigh stations if you attach basically any trailer to an F450 or a Ram 3500 because of the gross vehicle weight combined on the trailer and on the vehicle. The federal regulations really were designed in a slightly different era, and this vehicle is now over the GCWR that would actually cause you to need to stop at those weigh stations. Now, if you want to know more about the intricacies of towing regulations in the United States, let me know down there in the comment section down below. I'll try and create a separate video on that. Although it may sound ridiculous, there are certain bragging rights associated with the F450. When you pull up at the stoplight with your big trailer connected to it, everybody knows that you paid extra for the maximum towing capability. And over there on the Ram side, the Ram 3500, whether you're getting the base gasoline engine or the top-end diesel engine, there isn't that same kind of exterior differentiation. Now, it's a little too early to tell what 2017 will bring for the F250, 350, and 450, but Ford has said it will go to an aluminum-intensive construction. Now, Ford has not said whether it will use quite as much aluminum as we see in the F150. However, I still expect it to lose probably about 500 pounds, and you can expect that 500 pounds to go right into the payload and towing capability of this truck. That means that I expect the 2017 model will probably end up closer to that 4-ton payload mark than we have right here in this particular version. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes, and this has been the Ford SuperDuty. Be sure and check out the related videos on this channel. Click that subscribe button at the bottom of your screen, and I'll see you next week.